welcome to Up Close with Carlos Sang, celebrating art, entertainment, and the human spirit. Will Keane, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So this is your first time back at the RSC, since Prince of Homburg, back in 2002. How does it feel to be back in Stratford?
Great. I mean, Prince of Homburg, in fact, was a co-production between the Lyric Hammersmith and the RSC. So I've never done a kind of full-on RSC show before. And we rehearsed Prince of Homburg mostly in London, and then did I think we had about 6 weeks in Stratford in deep midwinter. And so I'm very excited to be coming back. Yeah, delighted.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's been a little while since we last saw you doing Shakespeare as well. And, I was curious to know, how has it been challenging at all, finding your way through that language again and, telling the story?
Of course, it's challenging, but it's completely thrilling. I mean, it's just amazing to be dealing with that language and to be sort of, you're just given so many possibilities. And so it's such an incredible sort of imaginative workout. It's really delightful, thrilling.
Yeah, I know that you previously also worked with Anastasia Hille on, the Scottish play at the Barbican. How has it been getting to work as husband and wife again after all these years?
It's just a dream, actually, if I'm honest. I couldn't admire her more as an artist and as a person. She's such a pleasure to work with, and she is so brilliant at what she does. And it's lovely feeling that there's a marriage there that, it's like this couple has, it feels like we have history, which is a great thing. And it's a real pleasure and privilege and honor to be working with her. She's fantastic.
Yeah, I can imagine. I know that Iago and Emilia's relationship, can sometimes, be a little bit overlooked, but it's so pivotal to, the unfolding of this tragedy. Yeah, how do you personally view their marriage, and how do you see that dynamic playing out in this production too?
I personally see it as fantastically important. I mean, almost at the moment, I think of it as sort of central to his experience. And I think that often people kind of dismiss his jealousy about Emilia, but I think that is absolutely integral. And I think that one of the things that I notice in playing is the experience of sort of farming the feeling out to Othello and allowing Othello is capable of a kind of language which Iago is not capable of. And there's some sense in which you feel the poison being leaked out through all of your feelings. I mean, more and more I feel about Iago that I'm less interested in the sort of classic definitions of psychopath or sociopath, and more in the idea of empath. That I think that he has an incredible ability, a terrifying ability, to be inside other people's brains. He has a sort of porous, he's able to move inside other people's heads. He keeps his own head kind of shut off, but he really feels, he's a very good actor, and he feels whatever situation he's in, and he kind of lives the pain of anyone who he's with. And so, sorry, going back to your original question, I feel that if Iago were incapable of love, he profoundly and jealously and proprietorially and obsessively loves Emilia. And I think that the sort of his feeling of definitely when you come to Act 5, the feeling of her having seen who he is finally is devastating. At some level, even he's saying to himself, I'm doing this for her, it seems to me.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like Iago is so misunderstood sometimes. I don't think he's as villainous as some people like to portray him to be. What was your understanding of Iago prior to coming to this show? And, how has your understanding and interpretation evolved over time too?
I think, well, I mean, I definitely wouldn't say that I've arrived at an understanding, and I hope I don't arrive at a complete understanding even by the end of the run. It seems to me that he doesn't really understand himself, as is we don't tend to understand ourselves very deeply. And I think that one of the confusions about, I mean, people talk about motiveless malignity. I think what is difficult is that he's a shapeshifter, and he is capable of sort of being anything in any situation. He's a kind of an empty vessel who is almost self-creating moment by moment. And so you sort of have to relax and simply offer yourself to each moment. Yes, I think that he is. I think from the beginning, I felt that what's terrifying about him, I think, is his sense of existential despair. I think that he is somebody who simply has no meaning in his life, which is the original sort of theological sin, isn't it? The sin of despair. Judas, I think, is desperate in that sense. And I think that I heard an interesting Harold Bloom talking about his relationship with Othello in terms of God and Lucifer, which I think is a very an interesting place to come from. The idea of sort of desperately wanting to be the favorite and being the one who's been cast down. And there is something, I think he's a highly sensitive and intelligent, but highly sensitive man who's done everything he can to desensitize himself and shut that sensibility down because it's sort of too painful to him. So none of that justifies anything he does, but but I think more in terms of, I always think in terms of opposites, particularly with Shakespeare. I always think if you are playing, to be playing someone who is so obsessed by control as Iago is, immediately to me suggests that inside he feels there is a complete lack of control. The reason he wants to control is because he feels out of control.
Mm, definitely. I mean, you've played some pretty dark, complex characters, over your
Mm-hmm.
career. Are these, qualities that you are particularly attracted to as an actor as well?
Well, definitely. I mean, they're fascinating parts. um, it's very difficult to say no to Iago or Putin or Macbeth, or they're wonderful, complex, and sort of incomprehensible parts. And I love welcoming my unknowing rather than my knowing, and that I love the sort of mystery. I love these people who claim to who spend such a long time sort of presenting an image to the world in order to hide something else which is going on completely in the opposite direction underneath. So yeah, so of course I'm fascinated by. I mean, who wouldn't be fascinated by these sort of Machiavellian villainous parts, whatever? But it doesn't mean that that's the only kind of thing I want to play. But they are, it's brilliant, 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 wonderful writing.
Of course. Was there a part of you that, saw a bit of yourself in Iago too when you started rehearsing as well?
Well, of course, you're drawing on your own experience and your own. It's impossible. Every part you are filtering through yourself, and you're exploring possibility. I mean, I have to say, with Iago, it's really hard to find a sympathetic bone in your body for him. But that is the challenge, or at least an empathetic bone. And it is, yeah, it's a fascinating. I always try to imagine people as children, and he's very hard to imagine as a child, Iago, what his sort of hidden child is. No, in answer to your question, of course, one is always trying to draw on one's own experience, and one's own imagination is built out of one's own experience, I suppose. And the thrilling moments in rehearsals are the moments when you find something which is sort of which you don't really recognize in yourself, but you do find is in you somewhere, which seems to take you beyond yourself. That's the thrill of acting, I think.
Yeah, of course. What have the conversations been like as well with Tim Carroll on how to, develop this production for an RSC audience in 2024 too?
It's been just a real delight to work with Tim again. I worked with him a lot in the last millennium, in the 1990s, and then I worked with him at the Globe 2 or 3 times. He's a dear friend and a really fantastic kind of master particularly of verse of the Elizabethan period. He's incredibly detailed and rigorous about what the verse is doing. And of course, he's the second biggest brain in the room after Shakespeare. And there is no kind of bigger brain than Shakespeare, but Tim is a really fantastic guide into why it's written the way, really trusting the language, trusting that Shakespeare's mind is, if we trust Shakespeare's mind, we can, it's going to be a whole lot better than anything we're going to come up with by imposing it ourselves. So the conversations it's a very fascinating process because it feels like layer upon layer upon layer of paint. And he's very brilliant the way he constructs a process, Tim, because you almost don't notice what it is that you're making, but he's always refreshing it. He's always making you come at it from a new angle and try to be clearer and simpler and more truthful with it.
Yeah, of course. I feel like, in Shakespeare's canon of works, Othello really has become the one that's, really, really stood the test of time and so regularly performed as well nowadays. Why do you think, this story, resonates so deeply with audiences?
Well, one thing is that it feels quite modern, I would say, because it feels like a sort of, relatively speaking, it feels like a domestic play. It feels like it happens sort of although of course it's within a romantic setting in terms of Venice and Cyprus, and or a sort of mythic setting, whatever. And of course there are sort of huge classical elements to it, but it feels very unified and personal and, like I say, domestic. So I think that's one thing which keeps it alive. I think that for a million reasons. It's astonishing writing, and it's a sort of terrifying thesis about the idea of sort of mental infection. That once you've dropped an idea, and it not only needs to be an idea, actually, the Scottish play does this in a different way, and as does Winter's Tale, actually. But once you've dropped an idea in a head, how it sprouts and grows, how in speaking a play of the imagination about jealousy, it's a brilliant kind of metaphor for the imagination. That one of the things it hypothesizes is that once you've allowed jealousy to take root in your head, it actually becomes it becomes more important to you to prove to yourself that you're right than in fact to save your relationship. It matters more to Othello by the end simply to prove that his suspicions are correct than the fact that they're not. And that sort of idea of imaginative infection is in itself an astonishing suspension of disbelief, like the act of theatre is. It's an incredible sort of Russian doll of sort of an essay, a symphony about the imagination within the context of a theatre, but which is talking about the germination and flourishing of an idea within a single head.
Yeah, I feel like Shakespeare, he captures the human condition so well. He really understands, human emotions and motivations. Having worked on a few Shakespeare productions in your career, do you feel like you've learned anything about yourself, from doing these plays too?
Of course, you learn constantly about yourself by doing these plays and by reading these plays. And for me, they are the sort of greatest possible gift to humanity that I really actually that I can possibly with Chekhov maybe or definitely in terms of literature, it's unimaginable what he's given to the world and how personally he can speak to you. I've had the privilege of doing a few of these plays several times in my life, and when you come back to a play after 10 years or something like that with these great plays, you find that they're completely different animals because of what you have experienced in those 10 years, who you are now, and what your vision of the world is, and you see things through a completely different glass, which is testament to their sort of really universal truth, that they're perfectly coherent, they're perfectly constructed, completely self-reliant universes, which speak to us absolutely intimately, wherever we are, whoever we are, at the moment that we are in our lives.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like at the same time, though, Shakespeare also sometimes doesn't get the best rep in wider society. I feel like for some people, the language still feels a bit distant to what it is today. What do you think, could be done to, improve appreciation of Shakespeare in wider society as well?
I think it should be taught and performed in schools. I think it should be an absolutely central part of the curriculum. I personally think the language kind of instills fear. People get a bit panicked in front of it, and there's a sort of reverence for it, which is actually not reverence towards it is not respectful. Yes, of course, it's complex, and yes, it takes a bit of unpicking, particularly in the later plays, but he's capable of such sort of elemental simplicity, and there's a musicality to the language. One of the things about working with Tim, the verse itself is such a help in terms of meaning. If you simply follow what the verse is doing, it really does a lot of your job for you. But of course, I think that it should be completely central in the curriculum, not only to be read sitting down at desks, but to be, for people to stand up and speak it and act it and live it.
Yeah, definitely. I was also curious, working in a space as stunning as the Royal Shakespeare Theatre as well. It's such a vast, gorgeous
Mm-hmm.
space. What sort of demands are there on you as an actor? How challenging is it to play to a space and make sure
Well,
that you're
we're still rehearsing in London at the moment. We're in Clapham rehearsal rooms, and we go to Stratford in about 10 days to start playing in the actual theatre. So I can't really speak for that, except to say, in general, it's one of the great privileges of being an actor that you are playing a new instrument every space you go into. So you are, and your body is the size of that space in a way. And I can't wait. I can't wait to get up on that stage and start feeling my way around it. So, because in fact, when I played Prince of Homburg, that was in the Swan, which is a completely wonderful space. But I've never played the main house, so I'm very, very excited.
Yeah, you've worked in some of the most prestigious theatres in this country, from the Almeida to the Donmar Warehouse, the Royal Courts of National Theatre. How different would you say audiences are in different venues as well?
Of course, they're different. I've also been lucky enough to do a lot of international stuff, Cheek by Jowl in particular, sort of international touring. And I played a lot in Spain and a bit in America, and whatever. The thing of taking plays to different societies and different cultures is sort of bewitching and fascinating, because of course people react in completely different ways. In terms of London theatres, well, in terms of any theatre, like I say, it's the actual space itself has a different character and has a different kind of resonance. And I don't just mean in a sort of acoustic way, but in a kind of spiritual, imaginative way. It has a different, there's a different way of feeling the distance between yourself and the audience. So it really is just a constant pleasure feeling how that changes the words, and how that changes the experience. And of course, there's a difference between playing to a school's matinee and playing to another matinee, or there are all sorts of different kinds of, playing to an audience at the Globe, or playing to an audience at the Donmar, for example. That there are very different, there are different things to do with what the expectations of an audience is, and are, etc., etc. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. When you took Patriots over to Broadway as well fairly recently, did you feel like there was a big change between the audience reaction over there compared to over here as well?
Yeah, no, it did. It felt very different. Yeah, it's a very different. It's such a different theatre culture there, and it was a real thrill to meet that. And it's a different, because I've done BAM a couple of times in New York, and it's a different. The Broadway audience is very different from the off-Broadway audience. There's a different kind of feel to it. And with that play, definitely there was a feeling. It was a different. There's a different. Well, it was that particular play in any case, because it was a play about, not about contemporary events, but the character that I was playing was Vladimir Putin, up until sort of 2014, something like that. So people's response to that character, because he's in the daily news cycle, you can feel that every audience was breathing in a slightly different way towards him, according to what events were happening. And it is true that there's a slightly different nuance of attitude that we have as British people to Putin from what the Americans have to Putin. And it's also the case that we had a lot of Russians in the audience, both in the States and in London, and it was fascinating feeling what they were getting from it. That was lovely to feel how warmly they received it. So yeah, no, every culture has its has its own particular way of listening.
Yeah, of course. You mentioned earlier about how you'd like to view characters as children. Did you try imagining Putin as a child, and how did you sort of react to that in a way too?
Definitely. I mean, it's something I don't really feel able to play someone unless I can slightly imagine them as a child. And in fact, in the case of Putin, there's a fair bit of literature, sort of interviews of him, to do with how he presents his own childhood. So a lot of people say, "Oh well, do we believe this?" But it was very useful to me as an actor, because what matters to me is what his relationship with his child is, in a way, more than whether or not that was true. I think. I mean, whatever. So yeah, no, definitely. I find it very, very useful to think of the child.
Yeah, of course. In recent years as well, your own child, Daphne Keane, has also become, one of the fastest rising stars. Did you always encourage her to act as well, from a young age too?
She was always, she spent a lot of her time in rehearsal rooms and kind of watching what was going on and being excited by it. And she herself, from a very young age, was, sort of writing little plays with her friends and, putting them on and stuff like that. And then when she was 9, we were living out in Spain, and we actually did a series together, out there, which was how the whole thing sort of started for her. So yeah, I was always. I mean, I'm just unbelievably proud of her, but I'm unbelievably proud of her as a brilliant actress, and above all as a brilliant and wise and astonishing human being. That she's got her feet on the ground, and she loves the work. I think that she always came to it having, like I say, spent a lot of time in rehearsal rooms and around theatre and filming and stuff like that. She was always kind of very clear in her head about it being about what matters is the thing that's being made, rather than any particular person. It's not about the ego. It's not about any of the people. One person being more important than another. It's about everybody concentrating on making something together, and that's a wonderful thing, I think, for a child. A wonderful experience for a child to have, and she was very lucky to have it. among many groups of very brilliant adults doing, on film sets, doing all sorts of incredibly diverse and complex jobs, masters and people who are very, very good at their trade, all of whom were contributing, collaborating on making a thing. And the thing was what mattered, the team and the thing, which is, you can't really, I think that's a great thing for a child to learn.
Yeah, of course. You got to work together again, obviously, on his Dark Materials too.
Mm-hmm.
What is it like, working together with your own daughter as well?
It's absolutely delightful. I mean, in fact, in his Dark Materials, we only ever shared a scene in the very first season. And even that scene, she was just spying on me when I came to have a meeting with Mrs. Coulter, Ruth Wilson. So, but it could not be more delightful working with your child. I don't know whether she'd say the same, but it's for me, it's the loveliest thing you could imagine. Like I say, making something together. That's what could be better than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. Just as a last question, you've done so much incredible work over your career and continuing to make, wonderful work too. What do you most want to be remembered for yourself?
Oh my goodness. Um, to be remembered for, I want to be remembered as a kind and generous and agreeable human being. I think probably.
Will Keen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Lovely to meet you.